In December 1945, two brothers digging for fertilizer near Nag Hammadi, Egypt, found a sealed jar buried in the sand. Inside were 13 leather-bound codices, ancient books sealed for nearly 1,600 years. 52 texts, gospels the Church tried to destroy. Teachings the Vatican declared heretical. The actual words of Jesus that the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD voted to erase from history. And the timing wasn't random. 1945. The same year World War II ended. The same year humanity detonated atomic weapons. The same year the archonic control system reached a peak so intense that something had to shift. In the secret book of James, one of the Nag Hammadi texts, these words will be hidden, and they will be revealed when the time comes that those who seek them are ready to hear what the archons do not want spoken. The words will surface not when the world is peaceful, but when the world is in crisis. Because crisis creates the cracks through which truth can emerge. 1945 was crisis. Humanity had just witnessed industrial-scale death. The archonic harvesting systems had revealed themselves so clearly that consciousness was primed for alternative explanation. And in that exact moment, buried texts containing the alternative explanation surfaced. Not coincidence. Timing. Place your hand over your heart. If you're watching this right now, if you found this video, if the Nag Hammadi texts draw you not as personal memory, you might be one of the chosen the texts were hidden for. Not chosen as in superior, chosen as in you're a monadad fragment that volunteered to incarnate specifically to receive these teachings when they resurfaced. What you're about to learn in the next 2 hours represents the most comprehensive examination of the Nag Hammadi Library ever assembled for practical application. Not academic analysis, not historical curiosity, practical application. By the end of this presentation, you will understand exactly what was found in those jars, why it was buried, how it reached you specifically, and most critically, how to activate these teachings in your own consciousness. You will learn the specific techniques Jesus taught his inner circle for breaking free from the reincarnation cycle. You will understand the cosmological framework that explains why you feel trapped in this reality. You will possess the tools that the early church spent centuries trying to destroy. And you will know with certainty whether you are one of the consciousness fragments that volunteer to incarnate at this exact moment in history, to receive these teachings and help collapse the archonic prison system from within. The discovery itself contains layers most researchers miss. Muhammad Ali al-Samman and his brother Khalifa weren't archaeologists. They were farmers digging for sabak, a soft soil formed from ancient settlements, perfect for fertilizer. They were breaking the law. The Egyptian government had forbidden unauthorized digging at archaeological sites. But poverty pushes people past prohibition. They were working at the base of the Jabal al-Tarif cliff, a limestone formation riddled with caves that had served as burial chambers for thousands of years. Their mattocks struck something solid, a sealed jar, red earthenware, nearly a meter tall. Muhammad Ali later described his hesitation. Sealed jars in ancient Egypt often contained jinn, spirits trapped by sorcerers, waiting to possess whoever broke the seal. But poverty is a more immediate fear than spirits. He smashed the jar with his mattock. No jinn emerged. Instead, papyrus, 13 leather-bound books, their pages thin as onion skin, covered in Coptic script. Muhammad Ali had no idea what he'd found. He brought the codices home and dumped them near the oven where his mother, Ahmad, was baking bread. She used some of the loose papyrus pages as kindling, irreplaceable texts, burned to heat flatbread. The Gnostic Gospel of Eve, mentioned in ancient catalogues but never found anywhere else, we'll never know if it was among those pages reduced to ash in a farming family's oven. But this seemingly random chain of destructive ignorance was itself part of the pattern. The texts were not meant to be preserved in their entirety. They were meant to be fractured, scattered, their survival uncertain, because only teachings that pass through fire, literal and metaphorical, retain their power. The codices that survived Ahmad's oven survived for a reason. They contained what was meant to reach you. Within weeks of the discovery, Muhammad Ali and his brothers killed a man. Ahmed Ismail, a local resident, had murdered their father in a blood feud the previous year. When the brothers learned Ahmed Ismail's location, they ambushed him, hacked him to death with their mattocks, and according to Muhammad Ali's own account, tore out his heart and ate it, divided among the brothers while it was still warm. This act of blood vengeance meant the family needed to disappear from the authorities' attention. The codices became dangerous to possess, physical evidence connecting them to the location of the murder. Muhammad Ali gave some of the books to a local Coptic priest for safekeeping. The priest showed them to his brother-in-law, Raghib Andrawas, a travelling teacher of English and history. Raghib recognized the potential value and brought one of the codices to Cairo, offering it to the Coptic Museum. The museum's director, Togo Mina, purchased the codex for a small sum. He died shortly after, in a car accident. His successor, Pahor Labib, secured the remaining codices through a network of dealers, smugglers, and intermediaries over the next several years. One codex ended up in Belgium, purchased by an antiquities dealer for the Jung Institute in Zurich as a birthday present for Carl Jung himself. That codex wouldn't return to Cairo until 1975, after years of international negotiation. The complete library wasn't assembled in one location until 1977, 32 years after the initial discovery. The delays weren't accidental. These texts were suppressed once because they threatened ecclesiastical power structures. They were being suppressed again through bureaucratic inertia, academic gatekeeping, and institutional resistance. The first full English translation of the complete Nag Hammadi Library wasn't published until 1977, edited by James M. Robinson. That's 32 years between discovery and accessibility. An entire generation passed without access to teachings that could have fundamentally altered their understanding of reality. But consider the alternative timeline. If the texts had been discovered and immediately published in 1945, they would have entered a world still dominated by colonial academia, rigid theological orthodoxy, and pre-digital information distribution. They would have been controlled, analyzed, and interpreted by a handful of scholars in European and American universities. The teachings would have been filtered through the very power structures they expose and condemn. Instead, they emerged slowly, over decades, as the world was changing. By 1977, the counterculture had already questioned religious authority. The civil rights movement had already challenged institutional power. Feminism had already critiqued patriarchal control systems. The texts arrived when consciousness was prepared to receive them without immediately surrendering them to the same authorities they indict. And even then, they didn't reach mass consciousness. The 1977 Robinson translation was academic, dense, expensive, available primarily in university libraries. It took the internet, the democratization of information, the collapse of traditional gatekeepers for the Nag Hammadi teachings to reach the people they were buried for. You, reading these words right now in 2026, 81 years after the discovery. You're not too late. You're exactly on time. Now we examine what was actually found in those jars, 13 codices containing 52 texts. Some were complete gospels, extended narratives describing Jesus' teachings and actions. Others were apocalypses, revelatory visions exposing the hidden architecture of reality. Some were acts, accounts of apostles after Jesus' departure. Others were wisdom texts, dialogues, and theological treatises. Each text was copied in Coptic, the late Egyptian language written in Greek letters. But most were translations from earlier Greek originals. The scribes who copied them were likely monks from the nearby Pachomian monastery at Chenoboskion, working in the 4th century AD, probably around 350–400 AD. Why were monks creating copies of heretical texts? Because the institutional church hadn't yet achieved total control. Christianity in the 4th century was still fractured into competing interpretations, rival schools, different communities emphasizing different teachings. The Pachomian monks may have been preserving texts they considered authentic even as the bishops in Alexandria and Rome were declaring them forbidden. Or they may have been creating a reference library of heretical works for apologetic purposes, knowing what the enemy teaches so you can refute it. Either way, when the pressure from Orthodox authorities became too intense, when possession of these texts became dangerous, someone took the codices, sealed them in a jar, carried them to the base of the Jabal al-Tarif cliff, buried them in the sand, and walked away. They trusted that the texts would survive. They trusted that the right people would find them at the right time. The texts themselves reveal a cosmology radically different from Orthodox Christianity, yet deeply consistent with certain streams of Jewish mysticism, Platonic philosophy, and what we now call Gnostic Christianity. The core framework appears across multiple texts with remarkable consistency, suggesting not individual speculation, but transmission of a coherent teaching system. Here's that framework, as clearly as it can be stated. Before the material universe existed, there was the pleroma, fullness, the ultimate source, sometimes called the ineffable, the invisible spirit, the monad. From this source emanated eons, divine attributes or principles, existing in paired complementary relationships, thought and life, word and truth. These aeons together constitute the divine realm, a reality of pure consciousness, free from matter, time, or limitation. Within this pleroma existed Sophia, wisdom, the youngest eon associated with desire and creative impulse. Sophia attempted to know the ineffable directly, without her complementary partner, without going through the proper hierarchical channels. This wasn't sin in the moral sense. It was an ontological error, a being acting beyond its nature, creating instability in the system. From Sophia's error emerged Yaldabaoth, the demiurge, the chief archon. This entity believed itself to be the supreme god because it couldn't perceive the pleroma it had fallen away from. Yaldabaoth declared, "I am God, and there is no other god beside me. Pure ignorance, speaking with absolute authority." Yaldabaoth and the archons, its subordinate powers, created the material cosmos, not as evil in itself, but as a prison, a system designed to trap consciousness in matter, in cyclical time, in forgetfulness. Bodies are cells. Reincarnation is the recycling program. The archons feed on the energy generated by souls trapped in this system: fear, suffering, worship, emotional discharge. But Sophia, recognizing her error and its consequences, formed a plan. She couldn't undo the material creation. It was too late. The cosmos was already in motion. But she could smuggle the antidote into the prison. She breathed the divine spark, pneuma, into certain humans. Not all humans received this spark. The Nag Hammadi texts describe 3 types of humans. The hilic, focused entirely on material existence. The psychic, capable of belief and moral behavior, but still bound by the demiurge's laws. And the pneumatic, those carrying the divine spark, capable of gnosis, able to remember their origin and escape the prison. If you feel a recognition reading this cosmology, if it doesn't sound foreign but familiar, like a memory surfacing, you're likely pneumatic. The spark in you is responding to the description of itself. Jesus, in this framework, wasn't Yaldabaoth's son sent to die for sins. Jesus was an eon from the pleroma, sent to awaken the pneumatics, to remind them of their origin, to teach them the techniques for escaping the archonic prison. He didn't come to save people through belief in his sacrifice. He came to transmit knowledge, gnosis, that would make salvation through external authorities unnecessary. This is why the institutional church found these texts so threatening. They eliminate the need for priests, bishops, sacraments, and churches. They place the power of salvation directly in the individual consciousness that carries the divine spark. Now we go deeper into the specific texts and what they contain. The Gospel of Thomas, found in Codex II, is perhaps the most accessible entry point. It contains 114 sayings attributed to Jesus, with no narrative frame, no birth story, no crucifixion, no resurrection appearances. Just teachings. The opening line sets the tone. These are the secret sayings which the living Jesus spoke, and which Didymos Judas Thomas wrote down. And he said, "Whoever finds the interpretation of these sayings will not experience death." The promise isn't belief-based salvation, it's understanding-based transcendence. You interpret the sayings correctly, you decode their meaning. You don't experience death, not physical immortality. Liberation from the death-rebirth cycle the archons use to recycle consciousness. Saying 3 directly contradicts the institutional church's external kingdom theology. If those who lead you say to you, "See, the kingdom is in the sky," then the birds of the sky will precede you. If they say to you, "It is in the sea," then the fish will precede you. Rather, the kingdom is inside of you, and it is outside of you. When you come to know yourselves, then you will become known, and you will realize that it is you who are the sons of the living Father. But if you will not know yourselves, you dwell in poverty, and it is you who are that poverty. Self-knowledge is the key, not belief, not obedience, not ritual. Self-knowledge, specifically knowing yourself as a fragment of the divine pleroma temporarily imprisoned in matter. The church couldn't allow this teaching to spread because it eliminates dependence on institutional mediation. If the kingdom is inside you, you don't need a priest to access it. If knowing yourself makes you a son of the living Father, you don't need a baptism ceremony or church membership to achieve that status. Saying 50 provides the recognition protocol. If they say to you, "Where did you come from?" say to them, "We came from the light, the place where the light came into being on its own accord, and established itself and became manifest through their image." If they say to you, "Is it you?" say, "We are its children, we are the elect of the living Father." If they ask you, "What is the sign of your Father in you?" say to them, "It is movement and repose." This isn't metaphor, this is a literal protocol for identifying yourself as pneumatic when challenged by archonic forces. Where did you come from? Not from this world. From the light, the pleroma. Is it you? Yes. We are children of the source elect, not through divine favoritism, but through carrying the divine spark. What is the sign? Movement and repose. The ability to act in the world without being trapped by it, to engage without attachment, to move through matter while maintaining awareness of origin. Saying 70 is even more direct. If you bring forth what is within you, what you have will save you. If you do not have that within you, what you do not have within you will kill you. You either have the spark or you don't. If you have it and you activate it, bring it forth, make it manifest in your consciousness and behavior. It saves you from the archonic recycling system. If you don't have it, or if you have it but fail to activate it, you remain trapped. The text doesn't say this to be cruel. It's describing how the system works. The Gospel of Philip, also in Codex 2, focuses on sacramental reinterpretation and the bridal chamber mystery. Philip describes the archonic system's counterfeit sacraments. The archons wanted to deceive man, since they saw that he had a kinship with those that are truly good. They took the name of those that are good and gave it to those that are not good, so that through the names they might deceive him and bind him to those that are not good. Baptism, Eucharist, marriage. The Church's sacraments are archonic imitations designed to bind consciousness to the prison system while appearing to offer liberation. The true sacrament, according to Philip, is the bridal chamber, the reunion of the divine spark with its complementary half, the restoration of the original unity that existed before the fall into matter. This isn't about physical marriage or sexual ritual, though Philip uses sexual imagery extensively. It's about conscious reintegration of the fragmented self. When Eve was still in Adam, death did not exist. When she was separated from him, death came into being. If he enters again and attains his former self, death will be no more. The separation into male and female, body and soul, matter and spirit. These divisions created the conditions for death. Reuniting them in consciousness reverses the process. The bridal chamber is the internal mystical union, where the pneumatic recognizes itself as both human and divine, matter and spirit, trapped and free, simultaneously. holding both realities in awareness without collapsing into either extreme. Philip also describes the pearl, the most valuable thing in existence, which a merchant sold everything to acquire. The merchant is Sophia. The pearl is the divine spark buried in matter. She sold, sacrificed, her position in the pleroma to descend and retrieve it. But she can't retrieve it herself. She needs the consciousness carrying the spark to recognize what it is, to remember its value, and to choose to bring it home. You're the pearl. Your entire earthly existence is the process of being retrieved. But you have to participate. You have to recognize your value. You have to remember you don't belong in the mud at the bottom of the sea where the merchant found you. The Apocryphon of John, found in 3 different codices at Nag Hammadi, II3 and IV, plus an earlier Berlin Codex version discovered in 1896, provides the most detailed cosmological account. John the Apostle, grieving after Jesus' departure, encounters a vision. A figure appears, sometimes described as a child, sometimes an old man, sometimes a young man, constantly shifting form, and reveals the secret history of reality. The monad, the invisible spirit, is described in negations: not knowable, not nameable, not limited, not definable. Any positive description would limit what cannot be limited. From the monad's self-contemplation emerged the first emanation, Barbello, described as the first thought, the forethought, the mother-father. From their union came the eons in complementary pairs, populating the pleroma with increasingly specific divine attributes. Then Sophia's error, her desire to create without her consort, the emergence of Yaldabaoth, the lion-faced serpent, the chief archon. His creation of the material cosmos with the help of subordinate archons, planets, elements, fate. His creation of Adam, the first human, as a soul without consciousness. And the crucial intervention, the Pleroma's plan to trap Yaldabaoth. They convince him to breathe his spirit into Adam, thinking this will give him control. Instead, it transfers the divine spark, the portion of pneuma Sophia had imparted to Yaldabaoth without his knowledge, into the human. Adam becomes alive, conscious, more knowledgeable than his creator. Yaldabaoth realizes his error and becomes jealous, angry, threatened. He creates Eve to try to extract the knowledge from Adam. He creates the material world suffering and limitation to trap the humans in forgetfulness. He establishes the archons as rulers of fate and time to recycle consciousness endlessly. But the Apocryphon doesn't end in despair. It ends with instruction. Christ, speaking to John, describes the descent of the divine messenger. I entered the midst of their prison, that is, the prison of the body. And I said, he who hears, let him get up from the deep sleep. And he wept and shed tears, bitter tears, he wiped from himself. And he said, who is it that calls my name? And from where has this hope come to me while I am in the chains of prison? And I said, I am the pronoia of the pure light. I am the thinking of the virginal spirit who raises you to the honoured place. Arise and remember that it is you who hearkened, and follow your route, which is I, the merciful one. Guard yourself against the angels of poverty and the demons of chaos and all those who ensnare you, and beware of the deep sleep and the enclosure of the inside of Hades. This passage isn't historical narrative. It's present tense instruction. Christ isn't describing what happened to Adam in mythological past. Christ is describing what's happening to you right now. You're in the prison of the body. You're in chains. Someone is calling your name. This text, this teaching, this moment of recognition. You're weeping because somewhere in you, beneath the layers of forgetting, you remember. And the voice says, remember your origin. Remember you don't belong here. Follow the thread back to your source. Guard yourself against the systems designed to keep you trapped. The Gospel of Truth, likely written by Valentinus himself around 150 AD, describes error as a fog, a nightmare that seems real until you wake. Thus did ignorance of the Father bring about anguish and terror, and the anguish grew solid like a fog, so that no one was able to see. For this reason, error became powerful. The material world isn't evil. It's error, a mistake, given solidity made to seem permanent and real. The purpose of gnosis is to wake from the nightmare and realize it never had the reality you attributed to it. When the light had spoken through the mouth of the Saviour, this is the gnosis of the living book, which he revealed to the aeons. No one is able to seize it except him who has become part of it. He who has not received the gift cannot speak of it, because it cannot be spoken. He who has received it knows that it is present. This describes the self-validating nature of gnosis. You can't understand it from outside. You can't acquire it through study alone. You have to receive it, the spark recognizing itself, the teaching activating what was always present, but dormant. Once it activates, you know. And no external authority can convince you otherwise, because the knowledge isn't based on belief or trust. It's based on direct recognition. The Sophia of Jesus Christ, found in both Codex III and the Berlin Codex, presents Jesus' teaching after his resurrection, answering questions from disciples about the nature of reality. Philip asks, "Lord, how then did we come here? And in what manner shall we depart? Or how did we get snared? And what is this soberness to which we have come?" Jesus answers, "All that is begotten, all that is created, all the elements of nature are interwoven and united with each other. All that is composed shall be decomposed. Everything returns to its roots. Matter returns to the origins of matter. But those who have come to know themselves and have recognized the Father who is above them, to whom I have given authority to receive and to know themselves, these will no longer remain in this place, but will go to the place from which they have come. They will rejoice in that place. The escape mechanism is clear. Know yourself, recognize your origin. The material body will decompose and return to matter. That's inevitable. But the consciousness that learned to recognize itself as separate from matter, as a fragment of the pleroma temporarily inhabiting matter, that consciousness goes home. Not through death alone, through death combined with gnosis. Death without gnosis leads to recycling. Death with gnosis leads to liberation. The hypostasis of the archons in Codex II narrates the archons' creation of humanity from their perspective. They're presented as foolish, arrogant, incapable of understanding what they've actually created. When they form Adam from matter, the text says, they took some soil from the earth and modelled their man, after their body and after the image of God that had appeared to them in the waters. They're copying a reflection they don't understand. They create a body, but it lies inert. Then the Spirit of God breathed into his face, and man came to have a living soul. Against their will, against their intention, the divine element enters. The archons wanted a slave. They got a conscious being capable of recognizing its own divine nature. When Adam demonstrates knowledge the archons don't possess, they become afraid. Let us cast a spell upon him and create forgetfulness in him. The archonic strategy isn't outright destruction. They need consciousness to feed on. The strategy is induced amnesia. Make the humans forget their origin. Make them believe they are only matter, only mortal, only subject to archonic control. Keep them in that state of forgetfulness through multiple incarnations, recycling them endlessly. The text then describes the archons attempting to rape Eve, a symbolic description of archonic forces trying to corrupt or control the feminine divine principle. But they did not find her. They found a shadowy likeness. It was the shadowy likeness they defiled, and they did not even realize whom they had defiled. The real Eve, the divine element, remains untouched, uncorrupted, even as the archons violate the material form. This pattern repeats in individual consciousness. The archons assault, manipulate, and traumatize the body and psychological ego, but they cannot touch the divine spark. They cannot actually corrupt or damage it, though they can bury it beneath layers of trauma, conditioning, and false identity until the carrier of the spark doesn't even remember it exists. The work of gnosis is excavation, digging through the accumulated layers to find what was always there, untouched, waiting. The exegesis on the soul, also in Codex II, describes the soul's fall and potential return, using the metaphor of a woman who leaves her father's house, falls into prostitution, is abused and degraded, and finally remembers her origin and cries out to her father for rescue. The father hears her plea and sends her bridegroom to restore her. This isn't about gender roles or sexual morality. It's about the soul's relationship to matter. When consciousness identifies with the body and material world, treating them as ultimate reality, it prostitutes itself, sells its divine birthright for temporary material pleasure or survival. The abuse isn't punishment. It's the inevitable consequence of identifying with something that's subject to decay, pain, and death. The cry for rescue isn't passive waiting, it's active repentance. Metanoia, the turning of consciousness back toward its source. The father in the text represents the pleroma, the bridegroom represents the divine messenger or enlightened consciousness that awakens the soul. And the reunion, the bridal chamber, is the reintegration of consciousness with its divine origin while still inhabiting a material body. The testimony of truth in Codex IX takes a more confrontational approach, directly attacking Orthodox Christianity's theology. It describes the serpent in the Garden of Eden not as Satan but as Christ, the illuminator, trying to free humanity from the ignorant creator God's control. What sort is this God? First, he envied Adam that he should eat from the tree of knowledge. And secondly, he said, "Adam, where are you?" And the God does not have foreknowledge. Otherwise, would he not have known from the beginning? The creator God in Genesis, Yaldabaoth, is exposed as limited, jealous, ignorant, afraid of humans acquiring knowledge. The serpent saying, "You will not die," is reframed as truth. Adam and Eve didn't die from eating the fruit. They died because the Creator cursed them after they gained knowledge. Knowledge itself doesn't kill. The archonic system kills those who acquire knowledge to prevent them from escaping. The testimony presents martyrdom, dying for faith, as archonic manipulation, a system that convinces people their death serves a divine purpose, when actually it's feeding the archonic harvesting mechanism. Real salvation comes from knowledge, not death. The paraphrase of Shem in Codex 7 offers a different cosmological perspective, emphasizing three root principles: light, darkness, and spirit between them. Matter emerges from the conflict between light and darkness, with spirit caught in the middle. The text describes techniques for spirit to ascend back to light, including visualization practices. See the light in your mind. Remember that you are from the light. The darkness cannot comprehend the light, but the light comprehends all. This functions as a meditation instruction, training consciousness to identify with light rather than matter, to remember origin rather than accept imprisonment. The second treatise of the Great Seth, in Codex 7, presents Jesus describing his crucifixion from the perspective of an eon who cannot actually suffer or die. "I did not die in reality, but in appearance. I did not suffer at all. Those who were there punished me, but I felt no pain. They did not touch me, but another bore the cross on his shoulder, Simon. Another received the thorny crown, and I was laughing at their ignorance." This isn't docetism for its own sake. It's exposing the archonic system's investment in suffering and sacrifice as redemptive. The archons wanted Jesus dead because his teaching threatened their control. They thought killing him would eliminate the threat. They didn't understand they were killing a temporary material vessel, while the consciousness they opposed remained untouched, mocking their efforts. The concept of our great power in Codex Vix describes three ages: the age of the flesh, the age of psyche, and the age of knowledge. The text places itself in the transition from the second to the third age, the moment when gnosis becomes available to mass consciousness, when the archonic system begins to collapse. For the archon was a laughingstock because he said, "I am God, and there is none greater than I." All this he said in ignorance. Now then, when the psychic age passes, when all knowledge is gathered and comes into being, then error becomes powerless, and the archons fall into confusion. This presents an eschatology not of divine judgment but of systematic collapse. As more consciousness carriers activate gnosis, the archonic feeding system loses power. The archons don't get destroyed by an external force. They simply run out of food as consciousness stops generating the fear and ignorance they feed on. The texts aren't describing a future event. They're describing a process already underway, accelerating, approaching critical mass. The thunder, perfect mind in Codex 6 deserves extended attention. It's a revelation discourse in the voice of a feminine divine power, speaking in paradoxes and contradictions. I am the first and the last. I am the honored one and the scorned one. I am the whore and the holy one. I am the wife and the virgin. I am the mother and the daughter. I am the silence that is incomprehensible, and the idea whose remembrance is frequent. This continues for several pages, building an overwhelming sense of a consciousness that contains all opposites, transcends all categories, cannot be captured in language, or limited by definition. The text functions as a consciousness-expanding device. By presenting irreconcilable statements as equally true, it forces the reader beyond binary thinking, beyond either-or logic, into a state where paradox itself becomes a doorway to gnosis. The divine feminine speaking here isn't a goddess to worship. It's the reader's own consciousness recognizing its capacity to hold contradictions, to be both trapped and free, both human and divine, both limited and limitless. Why then do you hate me, you Greeks? Because I am a barbarian among barbarians? For I am the wisdom of the Greeks and the knowledge of the barbarians. I am the judgment of the Greeks and of the barbarians. I am the one whose image is great in Egypt, and the one who has no image among the barbarians. The voice speaks to every cultural context, claiming to be both within and beyond each one. This addresses the pneumatic individual reading the text. You're the barbarian among Greeks, and the Greek among barbarians. You don't fully belong to any cultural system because the divine spark in you predates all human cultures. You contain wisdom these systems recognize but can't contain. You have knowledge these systems can't validate through their own frameworks. The trimorphic protenoia in Codex 13 presents a three-stage descent of the Divine Mother into matter to rescue consciousness. First, as voice, calling to sleeping consciousness. Second, as speech, teaching those who respond. Third, as word, entering fully into the material prison to guide consciousness out. Each descent is described in first person. I am the voice, I called out. I am the mother, I am the word that appeared in the flesh. I exist before the all. I exist within everyone. I came alone as the light. I came as the invisible one. I am immeasurable, incomprehensible. I am the mother of the voice, speaking in many ways, completing the all. This three-stage pattern mirrors the pneumatic awakening process. First, you hear something calling, a text, a teaching, an inexplicable sense that reality isn't what you've been told. You don't understand it yet, but you hear it. Second, the teaching begins to make sense. You start learning the framework, the cosmology, the techniques. Third, you embody the teaching. It's no longer external information, it's internal transformation. You become the word in flesh, gnosis incarnate in matter, divine consciousness operating a material vehicle with full awareness of what it's doing. The Gospel of the Egyptians in both Codex 3 and IV describes ceremonial formulas and ritual phrases. Lines like I-E-O-U-E-O-O-U-O-O-O-U-A appear, vowel sounds and sacred names used in ancient magical practice. These weren't meant to be read silently. They were meant to be chanted, vibrated, used as sonic tools to alter consciousness. Modern readers often skip these sections as meaningless gibberish, but they represent technology, practices for modulating brain states, achieving altered consciousness, accessing non-ordinary perception. The dialogue of the Savior in Codex 3 presents three disciples, Judas, Matthew, and Mary, asking Jesus questions about cosmology, eschatology, and practice. Mary Magdalene is presented as an equal participant, sometimes demonstrating superior understanding. When discussing the heavenly bridal chamber, Mary says, "Tell me, Lord, why I have come to this place to profit or to forfeit." Jesus answers, "You are revealing the greatness of the revealer." Her question itself demonstrates gnosis. She's not asking what to believe. She's asking about function. What purpose does her incarnation serve in the larger plan? This text presents Mary not as a repentant prostitute, the Catholic Church's later invention, but as a fully realized pneumatic, a teacher in her own right, someone Jesus addresses as an equal. The institutional church's suppression of Mary's role becomes understandable when you recognize what she represents: the possibility of direct gnosis without male mediation, spiritual authority based on understanding rather than institutional position, feminine wisdom recognized as equal to masculine. The Acts of Peter and the 12 Apostles, in Codex Fix, presents an allegorical journey to a city where a pearl merchant offers his goods only to those willing to make the difficult journey. The merchant is Christ. The pearl is gnosis. The difficult journey is the internal work of self-knowledge and transformation. You can't buy the pearl with money. Material wealth has no currency in this transaction. You can only acquire it by making the journey, doing the work, paying with effort and attention, and willingness to abandon comfortable illusions. The letter of Peter to Philip, in Codex 8, describes the apostles gathering after Jesus' departure, confused and frightened, unsure what to do. They pray for guidance. A voice answers from light. "Assemble together that I may tell you the things that are from the beginning until the consummation. When you were bound by these things, you did not know the mother. It is through the mother that these things came to you." The mother, Sophia, is identified as the source of their mission, not the Father in heaven, the mother who fell, who created the archonic problem, and who's now working through conscious agents to solve it. This reframes the apostolic mission. They're not spreading a salvation religion. They're participating in Sophia's rescue operation, awakening pneumatics to their true nature so they can escape the recycling system and return to the pleroma. Every person they awaken reduces the Archon's power. The work isn't about saving souls for heaven. It's about liberating consciousness from an illegitimate prison system. The texts also contain practical instruction on encountering archonic forces during the soul's attempted ascent. The Apocalypse of Paul in Codex V describes Paul's vision of ascending through the heavens, encountering the archons at each level. They challenge him, "Who are you? Where are you going?" Paul uses the formulas from Gospel of Thomas, saying 50, "I am coming from the place of light. I am a son of the Father. I bear the sign of the Spirit." The archons, recognizing the signature of the pleroma, allow him to pass. This isn't mythology, it's technology. The texts are providing the passwords, the recognition protocols, the verbal formulas to use when confronting archonic forces, whether during life, during death, or during altered states of consciousness. Modern readers dismiss this as superstition, but individuals who practice serious meditation, psychedelic exploration, or deep psychological work encounter what these texts describe: autonomous forces that seem to guard thresholds that challenge consciousness, that test whether you know who you are. The first Apocalypse of James in Codex V presents James asking Jesus how to navigate the archonic realms. Jesus tells him, "When the powers come upon you, say to them, 'You have no authority over me. I am from the Father. I am returning to the Father.' You are obstacles created by ignorance. You cannot bind me. Speak with confidence. Their power exists only through the fear they generate. When you refuse to fear them, they have no hold on you." This is psychology. The archons represent internal forces, trauma patterns, conditioned responses, ego structures, psychological defenses that challenge consciousness attempting to transcend its programming. They have no objective power. Their power exists entirely in consciousness's agreement to fear them, to accept their authority, to believe in their legitimacy. The moment you recognize them as illegitimate, as constructs of ignorance rather than true powers, they collapse. The second Apocalypse of James, in Codex V, describes James's martyrdom but frames it as triumph rather than tragedy. James speaks to his persecutors, You think you kill me, but you cannot. This body you destroy returns to matter. But I am not this body. I am the consciousness that inhabits it temporarily. You have no power over what I am. Then he's thrown from the temple and stoned. The text presents his death as graduation, the final shedding of the material vehicle he no longer needs. This confronts the reader with the ultimate question. Do you believe consciousness is generated by brain activity, dying when the brain dies? Or do you believe consciousness is fundamental, using the brain as an interface, surviving the brain's death? The Nag Hammadi texts insist on the second option, not as faith, as knowledge accessible through direct recognition. The Book of Thomas the Contender, in Codex 2, records a dialogue between Jesus and Thomas, described as Jesus' twin. Twin here doesn't mean biological sibling. It means someone who has achieved the same level of consciousness, who has become a mirror of the divine pattern Jesus embodies. The text emphasizes renunciation of the body, not as ascetic punishment, but as strategic detachment. Blessed is the wise man who has sought after the truth. When he has found it, he has rested in it forever and has not been afraid of those who wish to disturb him. The truth provides rest, not physical relaxation, but cessation of the existential anxiety that comes from not knowing who you are or why you're here. The authoritative teaching, in Codex 6, uses the metaphor of a fish caught in a net. The fisherman is the archon, the net is material existence. The fish struggles in the net, not understanding what's happened, dying slowly. But there's another kind of fish, one that recognizes the net, refuses to struggle, conserves its energy, and waits for the opportunity to slip through a gap in the net and return to the sea. The pneumatic is the second fish, not passive but strategically patient, not fighting the prison system with force, but understanding its operation and finding the exit. Marsanes, in Codex X, describes visionary ascent through multiple heavens, each governed by different powers. The text provides detailed descriptions of what the practitioner will encounter at each level: geometric forms, colors, sounds, autonomous entities. This reads like a psychedelic trip report or an out-of-body experience guide, which it is. The ancient Gnostics weren't just theorizing about invisible realms. They were exploring them through techniques that induced altered states of consciousness: fasting, sensory deprivation, rhythmic chanting, medicinal plants. The modern reader has an advantage the ancient reader lacked. We can cross-reference these descriptions with contemporary phenomenology, from meditation practitioners, psychonauts, near-death experiencers, and DMT researchers. The overlap is significant. People separated by 2,000 years and radically different cultural contexts describe encountering the same structures, the same entities, the same challenges when they explore non-ordinary consciousness. This suggests the Nag Hammadi texts aren't describing fantasy. They're describing territory. Real, explorable, consistent territory in consciousness space. Zostrianos, in Codex 8, is one of the longest and most complex texts describing an extended visionary journey through the heavens. Zostrianos encounters multiple levels of reality, receives instruction from angelic powers, and finally reaches the level where he sees the invisible spirit itself. But he's told he cannot fully unite with it yet. He must return to the material world, embody what he's learned, and complete his work before final liberation is possible. This establishes a crucial principle. Gnosis isn't an escape hatch from responsibility. You don't achieve one vision and immediately dissolve into the pleroma. You receive gnosis, then you must incarnate it. Live it, demonstrate it, use it to transform yourself and potentially help others awaken. Allogenes, in Codex 11, describes a similar visionary ascent, but emphasizes the apophatic approach. Knowing the divine through what it is not rather than what it is. It is not being. It is not life. It is not thought. It is not foreknowledge. It is beyond all these. Every positive description limits. Only negation approaches truth. This trains consciousness to release conceptual grasping, to stop trying to capture the infinite in finite categories, to rest in not knowing as a higher form of knowledge. than knowing. The Hypsophrone in Codex 11 is fragmentary but describes a feminine divine power revealing herself and her role in creation. The surviving portions emphasize her independence from the masculine eons, her direct action, her creative power operating without mediation. This was clearly threatening enough to warrant destruction. The codex was deliberately damaged, pages removed or destroyed. The sentences of Sextus in Codex 12 reads like a collection of practical ethical guidelines. Speak truth, but do not speak all truth to all people. Know when silence serves truth better than speaking. The greatest mystery, that the kingdom is within, yet most seek it everywhere but within. Let your body be a temple, but do not worship the temple. Worship the one the temple was built for. These aphorisms function as reminders, things to return to when you forget, when archonic programming reasserts itself, when you need to reorient toward gnosis. The fragmentary texts, bits and pieces too damaged to fully reconstruct, hint at even more. References to ritual practices, hymns describing the divine powers, cosmological diagrams, letter exchanges between teachers and communities. The vast majority of Gnostic literature is gone, destroyed. The Nag Hammadi Library is what survived, and only barely. Which raises the question, how much knowledge was lost? What techniques, what teachings, what sophisticated spiritual technology was erased when the Orthodox Church systematically destroyed Gnostic communities and their texts? Some scholars estimate that for every Gnostic text that survived, 20 were destroyed. Some estimate the ratio is even worse, 50 to 1, 100 to 1. We're working with fragments, the equivalent of finding a few chapters from a medical textbook and trying to reconstruct an entire medical tradition. And yet even these fragments contain enough to work with, enough to recognize the pattern, enough to activate what's already dormant in pneumatic consciousness. Now we must address the historical suppression directly. Why did the institutional church work so hard to destroy these texts and the communities that used them? Because Gnosticism represented an existential threat to ecclesiastical authority. The church's power derived from being the necessary intermediary between humanity and God. You needed the church to be saved. You needed its sacraments, its priests, its rituals, its institutional blessing. Gnosticism said, no, you don't. The divine is already inside you. Knowledge saves, not belief. Direct experience trumps institutional authority. The earliest Christian communities were diverse. Different teachers, different interpretations, different practices. Paul's churches looked different from James's churches. Johannine Christians had different emphases than Petrine Christians. Gnostic Christians were one stream among many, perhaps the dominant stream in certain regions like Egypt and Syria during the 2nd century. They had their own bishops, their own scriptures, their own liturgies. They considered themselves the true Christians, the ones who actually understood what Jesus taught. But Christianity was moving toward institutional consolidation. The Roman Empire needed religion that could unify diverse populations under central control. A religion emphasizing personal gnosis, individual spiritual authority, and skepticism toward material power structures wasn't useful for empire. A religion with hierarchical structures mirroring Roman administration, with standardized beliefs enforceable through coercion, with salvation dependent on obedience to institutional authority, that was useful. The Council of Nicaea in 325 AD standardized Christian doctrine under imperial sponsorship. The Nicene Creed established what Christians must believe to be considered orthodox. The Trinity, Christ's nature, the authority of bishops, the exclusive legitimacy of certain scriptures, all codified made mandatory. Christians who didn't accept these formulations were declared heretics. Their texts were confiscated and burned. Their teachers were exiled or killed. Their communities were dispersed. The Theodosian decrees of 380-392 AD made Orthodox Christianity the official Roman religion and banned all others. Pagan temples were destroyed. Gnostic churches were seized. heretical texts were systematically hunted down and destroyed. What had been diverse Christianity became monolithic Christianity, enforced through state violence. But the Pacomian monks had warning. They saw the persecution coming. They knew their text would be targeted, so they took the codices they'd copied, sealed them in a jar, and buried them in the sand near the Jabal al-Tarif cliff. They didn't bury them in the monastery where Roman soldiers would search. They buried them in neutral territory in a limestone cliff honeycombed with caves, used for burials, considered sacred ground. They trusted that the texts would survive until the time when they were needed again. And they did. 1,600 years in a jar. 1,600 years sealed away from the very Christians who would have benefited most from their teachings. But also 1,600 years protected from further corruption, revision, or institutional co-option. The texts that survived are older than most New Testament manuscripts, less edited, closer to their original forms. By being buried, they were preserved in a state of purity that texts remaining in circulation couldn't maintain. The timing of the discovery, 1945, is significant in ways beyond the obvious. World War II had just revealed the logical conclusion of material power worship. The Holocaust, the atomic bomb, industrial-scale death. Humanity had just demonstrated what happens when consciousness completely identifies with matter, power, and control. The archonic system had revealed itself with unusual clarity. People were ready to ask deeper questions about the nature of reality, about whether material power was actually real power, about whether there might be a different framework for understanding existence. The discovery also coincided with other significant events. The Dead Sea Scrolls were found in 1947, providing a similar time capsule of ancient Judaism and early Christianity. The development of psychedelic compounds in mid-century laboratories gave Westerners access to consciousness-altering substances that induced experiences remarkably similar to what Gnostic texts describe. The translation of Eastern texts, Tibetan Buddhism, Advaita Vedanta, Taoism introduced Western audiences to non-dualistic frameworks that made Gnostic cosmology more comprehensible. It's as if multiple sealed containers of suppressed knowledge all burst open simultaneously in the mid-20th century, flooding consciousness with alternatives to the materialist, rationalist institutional frameworks that had dominated Western thought. This wasn't random. This was the pneumatic rescue operation accelerating, providing tools and teachings to the generation that would need them. But the texts didn't reach mass consciousness immediately. That's important to understand. They were discovered in 1945, but they remained in academic control for decades. Scholars translated them slowly. Universities gatekept access. The Robinson translation in 1977 was expensive, technical, available only in specialized libraries. The average person interested in spirituality had no access to these teachings. Then the internet, digital distribution, PDFs of the complete library available for free download, YouTube channels discussing Gnostic cosmology, podcasts interviewing scholars and practitioners. The gatekeepers lost control. Information they'd managed for decades became instantly available to anyone with a smartphone and curiosity. This is the crucial shift. The Nag Hammadi texts reached you not because you went to graduate school in religious studies. They reached you because somebody uploaded a PDF, someone made a video, someone wrote a blog post, and the algorithm or the search or the synchronicity brought it to your screen. This is the fulfillment of the prophecy in the secret book of James. These words will surface not when the world is peaceful, but when the world is in crisis. Because crisis creates the cracks through which truth can emerge. We're in crisis. Ecological collapse, economic instability, political fragmentation, institutional delegitimization, epistemological chaos. The systems that provided meaning and structure for previous generations are failing, which creates space for alternative frameworks, space for suppressed teachings, space for gnosis. If you're watching this video, you're not accessing these teachings because you're special. You're accessing them because you're ready. Something in you responded to the signal. Something recognized the teachings as familiar rather than foreign. That something is the divine spark, responding to the description of itself, beginning to remember. Now we get practical. Understanding the cosmology intellectually is necessary but insufficient. The text repeatedly emphasized that gnosis isn't about knowing facts. It's about transformative recognition. You have to activate what you've learned. You have to embody it. You have to become it. The primary technique taught across multiple texts is what we might call consciousness separation practice, learning to identify as consciousness rather than body, as observer rather than ego, as pneuma rather than psyche. The Gospel of Thomas saying 70, "If you bring forth what is within you, what you have will save you." How do you bring it forth? Start with basic awareness meditation. Sit in a comfortable position. Close your eyes. Notice that you can observe your thoughts. Notice that you can observe your emotions. Notice that you can observe bodily sensations. Now ask, who is doing the observing? What is aware of thoughts, emotions, sensations? Can you observe the observer? Most people hit a wall here. They can observe thoughts, but they can't observe the observer. The observer seems to be identical with themselves. But push further. Notice that the observer is also an object in awareness. There's awareness of the observer. So who or what is aware of the observer? This practice deconstructs the habitual identification with ego, with personality, with psychological self. You discover layers of identity, each one more subtle than the last. Thoughts, emotions. The observer of thoughts and emotions. The awareness of the observer. Each layer, when identified, can be transcended. You're not your thoughts. You observe them. You're not your emotions. You observe them. You're not even the observer. You observe that. What remains when all objects of awareness are recognized as objects rather than self? What the texts call the pneuma, the divine spark, the witness consciousness that cannot itself be witnessed because it's the ground of witnessing. This isn't metaphysical speculation. This is direct investigation. Anyone can do this practice. The results are consistent across practitioners. Western psychology calls it metacognition, or witness consciousness. Buddhism calls it rigpa, or pure awareness. Advaita calls it the self or Atman. The Nag Hammadi texts call it the divine spark, or pneuma. Different names for the same directly accessible reality. Once you've stabilized basic witness consciousness, the practice advances. Now you're not just observing thoughts and emotions, you're observing your entire life situation as if you're watching a character in a story. Your job, your relationships, your problems, your achievements, all objects arising in awareness, none of them identical with the awareness observing them. The texts call this becoming a stranger to the world, not hating the world, not rejecting material existence, but not identifying with it, not believing it's your true home. Gospel of Thomas, saying 42, become passers-by, move through the world without being defined by it, engage without attachment, participate without identification. This is the practical application of Gnostic cosmology. You're a divine spark temporarily operating a material vehicle in a prison dimension. You can play the game without forgetting it's a game. You can fulfill your role without believing the role is who you are. This is extremely difficult. The archonic programming is strong. Society, culture, family, biology, all reinforcing the message that you are your body, your personality, your social role, your nationality, your beliefs. Every moment of ordinary consciousness is a moment of forgetting. The practice is remembering again and again until remembering becomes more habitual than forgetting. The Gospel of Philip's bridal chamber practice builds on this. Once you've separated consciousness from ego, you work on reintegrating the split, not by collapsing back into identification, but by holding both realities simultaneously. You are the divine spark and you are operating a human vehicle. You are free and you are temporarily imprisoned. You are eternal and you are mortal. Both true, both real, both held in awareness without contradiction. This is the pearl of great price, the consciousness that can function in matter while knowing itself as beyond matter. The merchant selling everything to acquire this pearl is you. What you're selling is every certainty, every comfortable belief, every identity you've used to avoid the terror of not knowing who you are. When you sell all that, surrender it, let it dissolve, you acquire the pearl. You become the consciousness that knows itself. The Apocryphon of John's description of Christ calling the sleeping soul provides another practice. You can use this as guided meditation. Imagine yourself as Adam, asleep in the prison of matter. Hear a voice calling your name. Feel yourself beginning to wake. The voice says, "You are not from here. You are from the light. Remember, follow your route back to its source." Feel the truth of this resonating in your chest, your solar plexus, wherever the spark lives in your subjective experience. Feel the desire to return, the homesickness for a home you've never consciously known, but recognize anyway. This isn't make-believe. This is activating what's already present. The texts describe it. You're experiencing it directly. The proof isn't external validation. The proof is the recognition itself. For more advanced practitioners, the texts describe visualization techniques. The paraphrase of Shem, see the light in your mind, create a mental image of brilliant white light. Not imagined light, perceived light, as vivid as physical light. Hold this image while maintaining witness consciousness. Notice that you can perceive the light and you are aware of perceiving it. The light is an object. The awareness of light is not an object. Rest in the awareness rather than the light. Then expand. The light grows. It fills your head. It fills your body. It fills the room. It expands beyond all boundaries until there's nothing but light and the awareness of light. The material world hasn't disappeared. You still feel the chair, hear the sounds, but it's saturated with light, transparent, less solid. This is phenomenological training. You're learning to perceive matter as the texts describe it, a temporary coagulation of consciousness, not ultimately real, capable of being seen through. The Archon encounter protocols from the Apocalypse of Paul and First Apocalypse of James can be practiced during meditation or altered states. When you encounter resistance, fear, doubt, a sense of being blocked, personify it. Give it form. Let it appear as an entity. Then use the formulas, "You have no authority over me. I am from the light. I am returning to the light. You are an obstacle created by ignorance." Speak this with confidence, as a statement of fact, rather than hopeful assertion. Watch what happens. Often the resistance dissolves. The fear loses intensity. The blocking sensation releases. This doesn't mean you've destroyed an autonomous demon. It means you've identified an internal structure, a trauma pattern, a conditioned response, an ego defense, and refused to grant it authority. The Archons, whether understood as psychological structures or autonomous entities, have power only through consent. Withdraw consent, and they collapse. For encountering the Archons during death or near-death states, the practice is similar but higher stakes. The texts describe the soul ascending through planetary spheres, each governed by archonic powers that try to prevent ascent. They demand explanation. Who are you? Where do you come from? Where are you going? The response, I am a child of light. I came from the light. I am returning to the light. I bear the seal of the invisible spirit. This formula identifies you as pneumatic, as carrying authorization from the pleroma, as not subject to archonic jurisdiction, whether you believe in life after death or not. This practice has value. Many psychedelic experiences and deep meditative states involve encountering entities that challenge or question. Having a prepared response, a clear statement of identity and intention, prevents panic and maintains coherent consciousness through disorienting experiences. The broader practice framework involves what the texts call vigilance, constant attention to which consciousness you're operating from. Are you identified with the body, with survival, with material concerns. That's hyletic consciousness, or at best, psychic consciousness. Are you identified with beliefs, with moral systems, with religious or spiritual identities? Still psychic consciousness. Are you identified with the awareness that observes all of this without being captured by any of it? That's pneumatic consciousness. The testimony of truth's reframing of the Eden story provides a practice of theological reversal. Take every religious teaching you've internalized about sin, guilt, obedience, and salvation. Examine it. Ask, does this teaching free consciousness or bind it? Does it encourage self-knowledge or dependency on external authority? If the teaching binds consciousness, consider the opposite. Maybe the serpent was the illuminator and Yahweh was the ignorant archon. Maybe eating from the tree of knowledge was the correct choice and remaining ignorant was the sin. Maybe questioning authority is the path and blind obedience is the prison. This isn't about becoming contrarian for its sake. It's about examining inherited beliefs to see whether they serve gnosis or serve the archonic system. Some religious teachings are genuinely liberating. Keep those. Some are control mechanisms. Discard those. The criterion is, does this teaching increase my capacity to know myself as divine consciousness temporarily inhabiting matter? If yes, it serves gnosis. If no, it serves the archons. The 30-day practice roadmap begins with establishing basic awareness practice. Days 1, 7. 20 minutes daily of witness consciousness meditation. Observe thoughts, emotions, sensations without identification. When you notice you've identified with something, gently return to observing. No self-judgment, just noticing and returning. Days 8, 1-4. Add the stranger to the world practice. During normal activities, maintain a subtle awareness that your consciousness operating a body rather than a body that has consciousness. When you eat, notice consciousness experiencing eating through the body. When you work, notice consciousness performing work through the body. When you interact with others, notice consciousness communicating through the body. Days 1-5, 2-1. Add the light visualization practice, 20 minutes daily. Start with basic witness consciousness, then introduce the light. See it, expand it, rest in the awareness of it. Some days it will be vivid. Some days nothing will happen. Continue regardless of apparent results. Days 2-8. Add the Archon encounter practice. When you experience fear, resistance, or blocking, personify it and use the formulas. You have no authority. I am from the light. Notice what changes. Days 2-9-30. Integration. Reduce formal practice to 10 minutes daily, but maintain awareness throughout the day. Notice how consciousness has changed. Notice what's different in your perception of yourself and reality. After 30 days, most practitioners report increased capacity for witness consciousness, reduced identification with thoughts and emotions, moments of recognizing the light the texts describe, decreased fear of death, increased sense of not belonging to the material world. These aren't supernatural achievements. They're natural results of consistent practice, common obstacles. The first is boredom. Meditation seems tedious compared to entertainment or stimulation. The archonic system trains consciousness to seek constant distraction. Boredom is actually the first archon you encounter. The resistance to being alone with your own awareness. Push through it. The boredom transforms into something else. The second obstacle is doubt. This is just my imagination. I'm making it all up. Nothing real is happening. Doubt is another archon. The appropriate response isn't to fight doubt or try to convince yourself. The response is to continue practicing while doubting. Gnosis validates itself. When recognition occurs, doubt dissolves not through argument, but through direct knowing. The third obstacle is inflation. You read these texts, you start practicing, and ego co-opts the whole thing. I'm pneumatic. I'm chosen. I'm special. This is the most dangerous obstacle because it feels like spiritual progress when it's actually archonic corruption of spiritual progress. The antidote is the thunder. Perfect mind practice. Hold all opposites simultaneously. Yes, you're pneumatic. You also have an ego that wants to feel superior. Both true. Neither captures the whole truth. Rest in the paradox. The fourth obstacle is despair. You practice and nothing seems to happen. Or you have experiences that seem significant but then fade. Or you recognize the archonic prison and feel overwhelmed by how trapped you are. The texts address this repeatedly. Gnosis is a process, not an event. You're not going to achieve permanent liberation in 30 days. You're establishing the foundation. You're beginning to remember. The full journey takes as long as it takes. Integration with daily life requires finding the balance Philip describes, being in the world without being of it. You still go to work, maintain relationships, pay bills, fulfill obligations, but you do it from pneumatic consciousness rather than hyletic or psychic consciousness. The external behavior might look similar. The internal experience is completely different. Practically, when you're in a difficult conversation, instead of identifying with your defensive reactions, notice consciousness experiencing defensiveness through the body-mind. The defensiveness still arises. You haven't transcended being human, but you're not identical with it. You can choose to engage or not engage without being compelled by the emotion. When you're facing financial stress, instead of identifying with fear and anxiety, notice consciousness experiencing fear through the body-mind. The fear still arises. Bills are real in the material dimension, but you're not collapsed into it. You can address the practical situation while maintaining awareness that you are not your financial situation. When you're experiencing pleasure, good food, physical intimacy, artistic beauty, instead of grasping or trying to make it permanent, notice consciousness experiencing pleasure through the body-mind. Enjoy it fully while it's happening. Release it when it's done, without attachment or regret. This is the bridal chamber, the ongoing integration of divine consciousness with material existence, neither rejecting matter nor being imprisoned by it. You're the pearl in the mud, still in the mud, but knowing you're a pearl. Measuring progress is tricky because gnosis isn't quantifiable, but certain markers appear. You notice suffering decreases even when life circumstances don't improve. You notice fear of death decreases. You notice less reactivity to circumstances. You notice increased capacity to hold paradox and ambiguity without needing resolution. You notice decreased need for external validation or authority. You notice spontaneous recognition moments, brief flashes where you know directly that you are not this body, not this personality, not from this world. These markers don't appear linearly. Progress isn't a steady upward curve. It's cyclical. Periods of clarity followed by periods of obscurity, followed by deeper clarity. The texts describe this as the soul's struggle to ascend through archonic realms. Each time you ascend a level, the archons at the next level present new obstacles. Eventually, you learn the pattern. The obstacles are actually teaching devices. They force you to deepen your gnosis, to refine your understanding, to become more stable in your identity as pneumatic consciousness. Advanced variations include group practice. Find others working with these teachings and practice together. Not to create dependency or institutional structure, the opposite. To provide mutual support and reality checking. The archonic system isolates consciousness. It convinces you're alone in seeing through the prison. Connecting with other pneumatics breaks that isolation. You realize others have found the same texts, recognized the same truths, encountered the same obstacles. This validates your experience without requiring you to surrender authority to a teacher or institution. Some groups work with the texts liturgically, reading them aloud, chanting the vowel formulas from the Gospel of the Egyptians, using them as the basis for group meditation. Other groups work academically, studying the historical context, the cosmological details, the textual variations. Both approaches have value, The liturgical approach embodies the teachings. The academic approach understands them. Ideally, you do both. Advanced practice includes working with altered states intentionally. The texts describe vision experiences, ascent through heavens, encounters with divine powers. Many ancient Gnostics used techniques to induce these experiences: fasting, sleep deprivation, sensory isolation, possibly entheogenic substances. Modern practitioners have access to legal entheogens in some jurisdictions, meditation retreats, float tanks, holotropic breathwork. These tools can accelerate gnosis if used skillfully. They can also create confusion, inflation, and false gnosis if used carelessly. The criterion for valid gnosis through altered states is the same as for ordinary consciousness. Does the experience increase self-knowledge and freedom, or does it increase dependency and confusion? If you have a profound vision that makes you feel special or superior, suspect archonic interference. If you have a profound vision that increases humility and recognition of the divine spark in others, that's more likely authentic gnosis. Long-term trajectory. The texts don't promise escape from material existence during this lifetime for most pneumatics. Some advanced practitioners might achieve what the texts call leaving the body while still alive, a state of permanent non-identification where consciousness operates the body while knowing itself as fundamentally separate. But for most practitioners, the goal is to establish sufficient gnosis that at death, consciousness doesn't get recycled. You die with knowledge of who you are and where you came from. The archons at the death threshold cannot deceive you. You use the formulas, maintain identity as pneumatic consciousness, and ascend to the pleroma rather than returning to matter for another round. What happens after months or years of consistent practice? You become what the texts call a living one, someone who has died to the world while still inhabiting it. Externally, you look normal. You might have a job, relationships, hobbies, concerns. Internally, you know it's a temporary assignment, a role you're playing, a game you're completing. You're not attached to outcomes because you know the whole material dimension is provisional. You're not afraid of death because you know death only affects the vehicle, not the consciousness operating it. You also become capable of helping others awaken, not through proselytizing or recruiting, the opposite, through embodiment. People sense something different about you. Not different in the sense of otherworldly or weird, different in the sense of present, calm, unfrightened. When they ask what your secret is, you can point them toward the texts, toward the practices, toward their own capacity for gnosis. This is how the pneumatic rescue operation works. One consciousness awakens and remembers. That consciousness, through its presence and sometimes through direct teaching, helps other consciousness carriers remember. Each awakening reduces archonic power. The system feeds on fear, ignorance, and suffering generated by trapped consciousness. Conscious beings who no longer generate fear, who see through ignorance, who maintain equanimity through suffering. These beings starve the archons. Multiply this effect across thousands, then millions of awakening consciousnesses, and the system begins to collapse. The concept of our great power describes this as the transition from the age of psyche to the age of knowledge. It's not a future event we're waiting for. It's a present process we're participating in. Every person reading these words who recognizes the spark and begins practicing is advancing the collapse of the archonic prison system. Community resources. The Gnostic Society Library maintains complete English translations of the Nag Hammadi texts online, free to access. The Nag Hammadi scriptures, edited by Marvin Meyer, provides the most recent scholarly translation with extensive commentary. For deeper historical context, Elaine Pagel's The Gnostic Gospels and Beyond Belief, while occasionally speculative, offer accessible entry points. For philosophical framework, Hans Jonas's The Gnostic Religion remains foundational, despite being written in 1958. For contemporary Gnostic practice, John Lash's Not in His Image provides controversial but thought-provoking interpretation, focusing on the archon concept. Online communities exist on Reddit, Discord, and dedicated forums, though quality varies wildly. Some communities maintain serious practice and scholarship. Others devolve into conspiracy theory and spiritual bypassing. The criterion for evaluating any community is whether it encourages self-knowledge and freedom, or creates new forms of dependency and dogma. A genuine Gnostic community should reduce your need for the community over time as you develop your own gnosis. A cult, masquerading as Gnostic community, increases dependency. The final inspiration offered without manipulation. You found this video. You read this far. You've encountered the Nag Hammadi texts not as historical curiosity, but as something that resonates, that feels familiar, that seems to describe what you've always sensed, but couldn't articulate. That recognition is the spark responding to the description of itself. You're not special for having this response, but the response is special. It indicates something real. The secret book of James says the texts were hidden for those who would seek them when ready. You sought them. You found them. Or they found you. Both statements are true simultaneously. Another paradox to hold. The monks who buried the jar in 350 AD couldn't have imagined you specifically, sitting here in 2026, reading their work on a glowing screen connected to a global information network. But they knew someone like you would exist. They knew the consciousness fragments that volunteered to incarnate during the collapse of the Archonic system would need these teachings. They trusted that the text would survive, would surface at the right moment, would reach the people they were preserved for. You are those people, not because you're superior to others, not because you've achieved some spiritual status, simply because you carry the spark, you've begun to remember, and you're ready to do the work of full awakening. The work is difficult. The obstacles are real. The Archonic system doesn't surrender its food source easily, but the texts provide the map. The practices provide the tools. The recognition you've already experienced provides the initial confirmation that this path is real and navigable. What you do with this is your choice. You can read these words, find them interesting, and return to ordinary consciousness, allowing the Archonic programming to reassert itself. Many do. Or you can take the first step of the 30-day practice, then the next step, then the next. Not because you're chasing some future enlightenment, because in each moment of practice, you are being who you actually are, rather than who the prison system told you to be. That itself is liberation. Right now, not in some distant future. The texts are tools. The cosmology is a map. The practices are methods. But the divine spark is you. It was always you. It was never not you. Everything else, this entire presentation, the Nag Hammadi Library, the historical suppression, the 1945 discovery, the chain of events that brought you to this moment, all of it exists to remind you of what you already are but forgot. Place your hand over your heart. Feel it beating. Notice that you can feel it beating, which means you are not identical with the heartbeat. Notice that you can notice this, which means you are not identical with the noticing. Keep going. Keep observing the observer. Keep watching the watcher. Eventually you reach what cannot be observed because it is the source of observation. That's what the texts call the pneuma, the divine spark, the pearl, the light, the kingdom within. It's been there the entire time, waiting, not for someone to grant it to you, waiting for you to recognize it. You just did. The recognition is gnosis. The gnosis is salvation. The salvation is not future or elsewhere. It's here, now, in the consciousness reading these words, beginning to remember who it is and where it came from. The monks buried the jar, trusting this moment would come. Sophia fell into matter, trusting consciousness could find its way home. The texts survived destruction, trusting you would find them when you were ready. You did. You are. The question now is, what will you do with what you know?